Break your arm today. You go to a hospital. They X-ray it. They set it. They cast it. You go home with painkillers. 6 weeks later, it's healed. Now remove all of that. No hospital. No X-ray. No cast. No painkillers. No doctor who has any idea what's happening inside your body. Just you, a broken bone, and a group of people who have never seen anything like this before. What happens next determines whether you live, or whether you become a liability your group can't afford to carry. This happened to ancient humans. Constantly. And what they did about it reveals something about the human species that almost nobody talks about. Part 1. How often it actually happened. Let's start with the scale of the problem. Ancient human life was physically brutal in ways modern humans rarely experience. Hunting large animals with handheld weapons required getting close enough to be kicked, charged, knocked over, traversing rough terrain daily, carrying heavy loads, climbing trees for shelter or food, crossing rivers, building shelters from heavy materials. All of these activities produced injuries at rates that would seem extraordinary by modern standards. Archaeological evidence from ancient human skeletons shows broken bones were extremely common. Healed fractures appear in a significant proportion of ancient human remains that have been studied. And here's the detail that matters most. Many of those fractures healed. Not perfectly, not in ways a modern surgeon would approve of, but well enough for the person to keep living. Which means something intervened between the break and the survival. Something was done. Part 2. The immediate crisis. Here's what a broken bone actually means. Without any medical intervention at all. Depending on the bone, the pain is immediate and severe enough to incapacitate. Movement becomes difficult or impossible. In the case of a broken leg, the ability to walk, to keep up with a moving group, to run from predators, to participate in hunting, disappears. In the ancient world, a person who couldn't move was a person who couldn't eat. And a person who couldn't eat, in an environment with no food storage, was a person who would starve. The broken bone wasn't just painful. It was potentially a death sentence. Unless the group around that person decided it wasn't. And here is the first thing the archaeological evidence tells us. Ancient human groups, again and again, decided it wasn't. Part 3. What the bones tell us. Here's where the science becomes genuinely remarkable. When archaeologists examine ancient human skeletons, they can tell the difference between a fracture that healed and one that didn't. A healed fracture leaves specific evidence in the bone. Callus formation, bone remodeling, signs of recovery that take weeks to months to develop. An unhealed fracture, or a fracture that killed the person quickly, looks different. What the evidence consistently shows, across multiple ancient human sites, across different time periods, is healed fractures. Lots of them. This means several things. It means the person with the fracture survived long enough for healing to begin. Which means they were fed. Which means they were protected. Which means someone, multiple someones probably, chose to keep this injured person alive during a period when they could contribute nothing and required significant care. This is not a small thing. In an environment where resources were scarce and every calorie mattered, keeping an injured person alive was a genuine sacrifice by everyone around them. And they did it anyway. Part 4. What they actually did. So what did ancient humans actually do when someone broke a bone? The honest answer is, we have to piece this together from multiple sources: archaeological evidence, studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, comparative animal behavior, early historical records from cultures that had minimal medical knowledge. And what emerges is actually more sophisticated than most people expect. Immobilization first. This sounds obvious, but recognizing that a broken bone needs to be kept still, and then actually doing something about it, required both observation and problem solving. Evidence from ancient sites, and from very early historical medical records, suggests the use of splints, sticks, bark, bound tightly with plant fibers or animal tendons, creating a rigid support around the broken limb. This is not complicated medicine, but it requires understanding, even without any knowledge of bones or healing, that keeping the injured area from moving reduced pain and eventually allowed recovery. That understanding came from observation. From watching what happened when a broken limb was kept still versus moved. From the accumulated experience of a group that had dealt with injuries before. Part 5. The pain problem. Here's something that requires its own attention. A broken bone is extraordinarily painful. Modern medicine addresses this with pain management that would be completely unrecognizable to ancient humans. Ancient humans had nothing like modern painkillers. But they weren't entirely without options. Ethnobotanical evidence, the study of how traditional cultures use plants medicinally, shows consistent patterns of plant-based pain management across ancient and traditional cultures worldwide. Willow bark, which contains salicin, a compound chemically related to aspirin, was used across multiple ancient cultures for pain and inflammation. Not because anyone understood the chemistry. Because someone, at some point, noticed that chewing willow bark made pain more manageable. And told the next person. Who told the next person? Who told the next person? Until the knowledge was embedded in the group's understanding of the world. Without anyone having a scientific explanation for why it worked. Other plants with analgesic or anti-inflammatory properties appear in traditional medicine records from cultures that had no contact with each other. Which suggests independent discovery. Which suggests the discovery happened multiple times. In multiple places. Because the need was real. And the solution was available in nature. For anyone patient enough to find it. Part 6. The Shanidar Cave Evidence. Here is the specific archaeological case that changes how you think about all of this. Shanidar Cave in what is now northern Iraq. Excavated in the 1950s and 1960s. The remains of multiple Neanderthal individuals. One individual in particular, who researchers have called Shanidar 1, had survived with injuries that are almost incomprehensible in the context of ancient life. A withered right arm, which had been amputated or lost at some point before death. The bone showing evidence of healing. A healed wound above the left eye. Evidence of significant damage to the left side of the body. Probable significant vision impairment. And evidence of severe arthritis. This individual, by any reasonable assessment of survival in the ancient world, should not have survived. Could not have survived alone. Every single injury on that body represents a period of dependence. A period of being unable to contribute to the group's survival. Of needing to be fed, protected, cared for. And yet, the bones show healing. Years of healing. Someone cared for Shanidar 1. Not for days, but for what appears to have been years. In a Neanderthal group. In conditions that gave them no particular reason to do so. Beyond the fact that this was a member of their group. And they chose to keep him alive. Part 7. What the body did on its own. Here is the biology that made survival possible even when care was imperfect. The human body, your body, has a remarkable capacity for bone healing that requires no medical intervention to begin. When a bone breaks, the body immediately begins a healing cascade. Blood clotting forms around the fracture site. Specialized cells called osteoclasts begin clearing damaged bone tissue. Osteoblasts, bone-building cells, begin laying down new bone material. A callus forms around the break, initially soft, gradually hardening over weeks and months, until the bone is, in many cases, actually stronger at the fracture site than it was before. This process doesn't require a doctor. It doesn't require a cast. It doesn't require medical knowledge of any kind. It requires time, and enough nutrition to fuel the healing process. And enough protection from further injury, to allow the healing to complete. Ancient humans who received basic care, immobilization, food, protection, were giving their body's own healing system the conditions it needed to work. The medicine was already inside them. The care just gave it a chance to operate. Part 8. When it went wrong. Honest accounts of this story cannot ignore the cases that didn't end well. Not every broken bone healed. Not every injured person survived. Archaeological evidence includes examples of fractures that healed badly. Bones that knit in misaligned positions. That would have caused permanent disability or chronic pain. But that the person survived long enough for the misaligned healing to complete. These cases tell their own story. A person with a badly healed leg fracture, who walks with a permanent limp for the rest of their life, but keeps living, was still being kept alive by their group. Still being fed, still being protected, despite a permanent reduction in their ability to contribute to hunting, gathering, or defense. There are also cases where the fracture, or the infection that followed, was fatal. Open fractures, where the bone breaks through the skin, created immediate infection risk in environments with no antiseptic treatment. Without the ability to control infection, an open fracture in the ancient world was often fatal, not from the break itself, but from what followed. The line between survival and death from injury was not always about the care received. Sometimes it was simply about which bone broke, and how. Part 9. What this reveals about ancient humans. Here is the thing worth sitting with longest. Keeping an injured person alive, in the conditions ancient humans lived in, was not the path of least resistance. It was harder than the alternative. It required more food, more protection, more attention. It reduced the group's overall efficiency, at exactly the moment when efficiency mattered most. And yet, the archaeological record is full of healed bones, full of evidence that ancient humans, including Neanderthals, made this choice, again, and again, and again, across hundreds of thousands of years, across multiple species of human, on multiple continents, without anyone telling them they had to, without any written ethical code requiring it, without any religious doctrine instructing compassion. They just did it, because someone in their group was hurt, and leaving them wasn't something they were willing to do. Evidence suggests this pattern, this consistent choice to care for the injured at cost to the group, was not a cultural accident. It was a fundamental feature of what human groups were, and what they had been, for a very long time. Part 10. What lives in you from this? Here is the modern connection. You are descended from groups that made this choice, not groups that abandoned injured members, not groups that left the hurt behind when they became inconvenient, groups that fed injured members when food was scarce, protected them when protection was costly, waited when waiting slowed everyone down. The instinct you feel, when someone near you is hurt, to help rather than leave, is not a cultural invention. It is not something civilization created. It is something much older. Something that was already present in the groups that survived, while other groups that didn't make this choice didn't survive. The compassion that feels natural to you was selected for, over hundreds of thousands of years, in conditions that should have made it impractical, but didn't, because groups that took care of each other consistently outperformed groups that didn't. The broken bones healed, because someone decided they were worth healing. And here you are. Outro. Somewhere in the ancient past, one of your ancestors broke a bone, and couldn't walk, couldn't hunt, couldn't contribute anything, for weeks or months, and the people around them made a choice. They kept going with them. Slower, more burdened, less efficient, but together. And that choice, made thousands of times, by thousands of different groups, over hundreds of thousands of years, is part of why you exist. The next time you help someone who can't help you back, you're not doing something unusual. You're doing something ancient, something your species was doing, long before anyone had a word for it. Subscribe for more, because there's a lot more about what ancient humans did, that still lives in what you do today. And it only gets stranger.